0 o'clock to 1:30. Cold open. Narrator. In October of 1992, a nuclear test in China sent seismic waves rippling across the entire Pacific Rim. Monitoring stations in Alaska lit up with unusual readings, but when analysts studied the data more carefully, they noticed something deeply wrong. Buried beneath the Alaskan wilderness, something was bouncing those seismic waves back in a pattern that no natural geological formation could explain. The shape the sensors outlined was not a mountain, it was not a ridge, it was a pyramid, and it was enormous. Narrator. This is not a conspiracy theory spun from anonymous internet forums. The story of the Alaskan Dark Pyramid threads through military testimony, declassified government documents, investigative journalism, and the strange silence of official agencies who refuse to acknowledge what may be the most significant archaeological discovery in human history. Tonight we go underground, 1:30 to 3 o'clock, the original discovery narrator. The story officially enters the public record in 1992, though whispers of something strange in the Alaskan interior had circulated among military personnel for years before that. When the Chinese nuclear detonation triggered seismic monitoring equipment across Alaska, two civilian investigators began comparing notes. A man named Dr. Anton Mikulik and a colleague who has never been publicly identified reportedly analyzed the seismic return data and concluded that the subsurface structure they were tracking was approximately 2 miles wide at its base. Narrator. To put that in perspective, the Great Pyramid of Giza has a base of roughly 756 feet per side. The structure buried beneath Alaska would dwarf it by a factor so extreme that conventional archaeology has no framework for explaining it. The anomaly sits somewhere west of Mount McKinley, now known as Denali, in a stretch of wilderness that the United States military has quietly maintained restricted access to for decades. No civilian archaeological team has ever been permitted to formally investigate the site. Narrator. In 1999, a story ran in a small Alaskan newspaper. A woman identified only as a retired military wife described what her husband had told her before his death. He had been part of a classified team in the 1990s that was brought to a remote Alaskan location to assess what the military was calling a black pyramid. She stated he described it as built from a material that was darker than the surrounding rock, perfectly geometric, and completely non-reflective. The story was picked up briefly, then vanished from mainstream media entirely. 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Military involvement and classified access. Narrator. The United States military has maintained a significant and sometimes secretive presence in Alaska since World War II. The state is a critical strategic corridor between North America and Russia, and it houses some of the most classified installation infrastructure in the Western Hemisphere: Fort Greely, Clear Air Force Station, the White Alice Communications System. Alaska is not simply remote wilderness. It is one of the most heavily monitored pieces of territory on the planet. Narrator. Former military personnel who have spoken on condition of anonymity to independent researchers over the years have described a pattern that investigators find deeply troubling. Personnel assigned to certain Alaskan postings in the interior were routinely discouraged from discussing unusual geological formations they encountered during operations. One former Army engineer who served in Alaska in the late 1980s described being briefed before a survey mission that certain topographical anomalies in a designated grid zone were classified and were not to be photographed, mapped, or reported through standard channels. Narrator. This kind of operational security is not unusual for active military installations. What is unusual is applying it to naturally occurring geography. Unless, of course, what is being protected is not natural at all. Researchers who have filed Freedom of Information Act requests for geological survey data covering the suspected pyramid coordinates have consistently received one of two responses. Either the records do not exist, or the specific grid coordinates fall under exemptions related to national security. That exemption requires a justification. Geological survey data does not threaten national security. Something else at those coordinates does. Narrator. The HARP facility in Gakona, Alaska, officially described as a high-frequency research program studying the ionosphere, sits within the broader region flagged by pyramid researchers as relevant. HARP has long attracted classified program speculation, and while much of that speculation is exaggerated, the facility does operate under layers of restricted documentation. The proximity of HARP to the suspected pyramid coordinates has led some investigators to ask whether the program was positioned there for reasons beyond atmospheric research, whether it is drawing on or studying some form of energy associated with the buried structure. 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock. What the pyramid might be. Narrator: if the structure is real, what is it? That question branches into two fundamental directions, and both of them are disturbing in their own way. The first possibility is that the pyramid is an ancient human construction, built by a civilization so far removed from the historical record that its existence would fundamentally rewrite everything we think we know about the development of human society on this planet. The second possibility is that it is not human at all. Narrator: ancient construction first. We know that humans crossed from Asia into the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge, a massive corridor of exposed land that connected what is now Siberia to Alaska during the last ice age, when sea levels were dramatically lower. That crossing occurred roughly 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, though some evidence pushes that date back even further. A civilization capable of constructing a pyramid with a 2-mile base would have required organizational complexity, engineering knowledge, and labor coordination that we currently believe did not exist until the rise of Mesopotamian cultures around 5,000 years ago. Narrator: but our archaeological record is incomplete, catastrophically incomplete. Sea levels at the end of the last ice age rose by over 400 feet, swallowing entire coastlines and any civilizations that lived on them. If an advanced pre-ice age culture existed in the Pacific Northwest or the Alaskan interior, the majority of their settlements and monuments would now be underwater or buried under thousands of years of glacial deposit. A massive inland pyramid, constructed from dense dark stone, might be exactly what survived. Narrator: the non-human hypothesis is one that mainstream researchers refuse to engage with publicly, but it persists because the scale of the structure, if accurate, is simply beyond what any known ancient human culture could plausibly have built. The darker stone material described by the military wife who came forward in 1999 does not match any known regional geological composition in that part of Alaska. If it is an artificial construction, the material it was built from was either transported an enormous distance or it is something we do not have a natural classification for. 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The cover-up machinery. Narrator: governments suppress information for a relatively small number of reasons: military advantage, economic interest, prevention of public panic. In the case of the Alaskan pyramid, all three motivations are potentially in play simultaneously. If the structure predates any known human civilization, the geopolitical implications for territorial sovereignty, indigenous land rights, and the rewriting of human history would create enormous political disruption. If it is something more than human, the panic consideration alone would justify indefinite suppression. Narrator: there is also a technology angle that intelligence analysts have raised in private. Any structure of this scale and apparent age, still intact beneath the Alaskan permafrost, represents either a feat of construction engineering so advanced it exceeds our current capabilities, or a material science so durable it has survived conditions that would destroy anything we know how to build. Either way, understanding how it was made would be a classified strategic priority. You do not let other nations study that. You classify it. You surround it with restricted airspace and no-go coordinates, and you research it in secret. Narrator: the geographic isolation of the site works in the government's favor. Alaska is vast and sparsely populated. The interior regions near Denali are among the most difficult terrain on Earth to access without military-grade logistics. There are no nearby communities demanding answers. There are no local journalists covering the story with sustained attention. The site is essentially self-concealing, and the government has had decades to ensure it stays that way. Narrator: independent satellite imagery analysis conducted by amateur researchers using commercial platforms has identified what some describe as anomalous geometric regularity in the topography of areas near the suspected site. These analyses are not peer-reviewed, they have not been confirmed, but the consistency with which different researchers, working independently, identify the same coordinates is not nothing. It is a data point, and in a case where official data is classified, data points are all we have. 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock. What happens now? Narrator, the frustrating reality of the Alaskan pyramid story is that we are caught in a verificati.